She was a virgin, never knew the warmth of a hug nor the right to say no. She was given to strangers in a secret auction, where her body was the currency. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. The sun rose lazily over the hills of rural Virginia, but for Emily Taylor, 21 years old, each dawn was just another day of confinement. The Morgan estate stretched across acres of red soil, surrounded by tall pines that whispered secrets to the wind. But she had never stepped beyond the wrought iron gates that marked the boundaries of her gilded prison. Dressed once more in immaculate white, as she had been every morning for the past 10 years, Emily observed the workers beginning their daily activities through her second-floor window. The cotton dress, simple yet flawless, covered every inch of her fair skin, leaving only her hands and face exposed. That's how Victoria liked it. That's how it had always been. Victoria Morgan, her stepmother, appeared to be a well-preserved 50, but her gaze carried the coldness of someone who had seen much more than she should have. Widowed for a decade, she had taken control of the estate after the mysterious death of her husband, Robert Taylor, Emily's father. The official story spoke of an accident during a business trip, but the body was never found, and questions never ceased to echo through the dark corners of the main house. "Emily, come down immediately." Victoria's cutting voice echoed through the hallway, carrying that authority that brooked no questions. "We have important visitors today, and you need to be presentable." The young woman descended the solid wooden staircase, her bare feet barely making a sound against the polished steps. The sitting room was impeccably arranged, with white flowers in every corner and the sweet aroma of jasmine hanging in the air. Everything very pure, very virginal, very calculated. "Sit there in the light armchair," Victoria ordered, nervously adjusting a pearl necklace at her throat. "And remember the rules. Eyes down, few words, straight posture. You represent something very valuable, my dear, something that cannot be wasted." Emily obeyed in silence, as she always had. But this time, something different pulsed in her chest. Perhaps it was the anxious way Victoria paced around the room, or how she had insisted Emily wear her prettiest dress, the one with handmade lace that had belonged to her mother. There were secrets in the air, thick as the humidity that preceded a storm. The visitors arrived at noon in luxury cars that contrasted with the rural simplicity of the place. 3 men in dark suits, all over 50, all carrying an aura of power and danger that made Emily tremble internally. They spoke in low voices with Victoria, casting furtive glances in her direction, as if she were a work of art being evaluated for purchase. "The merchandise is in perfect condition," one of them muttered, a fat man with gold rings on each finger. "Untouched, as promised." "Completely," Victoria replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Raised in total isolation, educated only with the essentials, preserved like a relic. She's exactly what you're looking for the event." Emily felt her blood freeze in her veins. Merchandise event. The words echoed in her mind like funeral bells, revealing a truth she had always suspected but never dared confront. She wasn't a daughter being protected. She was a product being preserved for sale. During dinner served at the mahogany table her family had used for generations, the men discussed details that made her hands tremble imperceptibly. They talked about a private auction, international buyers, values that would take anyone's breath away. And at the center of it all, like the main course of a macabre banquet, was her. "The event will be in 2 weeks, said the tallest man, with a graying beard and a scar on his chin. "We have confirmation from at least 15 interested parties, including some very, very important names in agribusiness and politics. The publicity was discreet, but effective." Victoria nodded, her eyes shining with a greed that Emily had never seen so raw. "And the payment terms?" 50% in advance, 50% on delivery." "As agreed." The third man, thin with small eyes, smiled predatorily. "Your stepdaughter will yield enough for you to never worry about money again, Victoria. It's a unique opportunity." That night, locked in her second-floor bedroom with the key turned from the outside for the first time in years, Emily finally understood the extent of her prison. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, financial, existential. Each white dress, each rigid rule, Each isolation from the outside world had been carefully planned to mold her into something marketable. The days that followed passed like a dense and suffocating fog. Emily tried to maintain a normal routine, but every gesture from Victoria, every look from the staff, every detail of the main house seemed loaded with new, sinister significance. She began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed, whispered phone conversations that ceased when she approached, documents kept under lock and key in the office, mysterious preparations that happened in the dead of night. A week before the event, Emily decided to act. She waited until Victoria left for her meetings in town and went down to the office, a space that had always been strictly forbidden to her. The door, surprisingly, was unlocked. Perhaps it was fate, or perhaps Victoria was becoming careless due to anxiety. The office smelled of old leather and expensive cigarettes. There were paintings of thoroughbred horses on the walls, a bookshelf full of agribusiness books, and in the center, a noble wooden desk covered with papers. Emily searched everything carefully, fearing to leave traces, until she found a folder marked with her own name. Inside were documents that made her world completely collapse. Purchase and sale contracts, detailed medical assessments of her physical condition, photographs of her taken without her knowledge during sunbathing in the garden, and most shocking of all, a psychological report that described her as mentally conditioned for total submission, ideal for specific purposes of adult entertainment. Her hands trembled as she read each line, each word that reduced her to an object, a valuable commodity created to satisfy the most sordid desires of powerful men. There was even a detailed timeline of the last 10 years of her life, showing how every aspect of her education, isolation, and conditioning had been meticulously planned. "I always knew you were too curious for your own good." Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Emily turned, still holding the documents, and found her stepmother standing in the doorway, wearing an icy smile that revealed perfectly aligned teeth. "Victoria, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything, dear. Actually, it's better that you know the truth. It makes everything easier." Victoria entered the office and closed the door behind her, turning the key in the lock. "Sit down. We have a lot to talk about." Emily obeyed, but this time not out of habit or fear. She obeyed because she needed answers, because something fierce was awakening inside her, something that had been suppressed by years of manipulation and control. "Your father didn't die in an accident," Victoria began, pouring herself a generous dose of whiskey from a bar hidden behind a false bookshelf. "Robert discovered my plans for you when you turned 18. He threatened to denounce me, said he would kill me before allowing me to touch his precious daughter." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. She wouldn't give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her break. "So I took measures. An arranged accident during a business trip to West Virginia. The body was disposed of in a way that it would never be found. Officially, Robert Taylor died, and I inherited everything, the estate, the bank accounts, and mainly you." "Why?" The word came out as a hoarse whisper. "Why do this to me? I was just a child." Victoria laughed, a harsh and unpleasant sound. "Because you're worth more than this entire estate, dear. Do you have any idea how much rich, bored men are willing to pay for a virgin raised in captivity, conditioned to absolute obedience? You're a work of art, Emily, a work of art that I spent 10 years creating." The revelation hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. Everything made sense now, the restricted education, the social isolation, the rigid rules about clothing and behavior, the constant surveillance. She had been molded since childhood to be the perfect product for a specific and nauseating market. "The auction will take place in 6 days, Victoria continued, savoring each word as if it were a fine wine. "We already have 15 confirmed interested parties, including some names you would recognize if you knew anything about the real world. Politicians, businessmen, even some foreigners." "And if I refuse? If I run away?" "To where, dear?" Victoria smiled with disdain. "You don't have your own documents. You don't know anyone besides me and the staff who are loyal to me. You have no money or skills to survive in the real world. Besides," she opened a drawer and showed a syringe with transparent liquid, "I have methods to ensure your cooperation." That night, Locked in her room with the key turned from the outside for the first time in years, Emily made a decision that would change everything. She would no longer be the passive victim of a story written by others. If she was going to be sold as an object, at least she would fight as a human being. The night of the auction arrived like an inevitable storm. The Morgan estate had been transformed into a scene straight out of Emily's darkest nightmares. Black candles in silver candlesticks created dancing shadows on the walls, red carpets covered the wooden floor, and the heavy aroma of incense mixed with the smell of expensive cigars and imported alcohol. Emily was prepared like a macabre bride. 2 staff members she had never seen before bathed her with scented oils, combed her brown hair until it shone like silk, and dressed her in a white dress that more resembled a luxurious shroud. The fabric was almost transparent, revealing the curves of her body in a way that made her feel naked and vulnerable. "You're perfect," Victoria murmured, observing her in the bedroom mirror. 15 years of planning culminating in this night. You should feel honored. But Emily didn't feel honored. She felt like an animal being prepared for slaughter. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a cold anger that grew in her chest like fire fed by the wind. The guests began arriving at 8 in the evening. Expensive cars parked in the estate's courtyard, and men in tailored suits descended carrying leather briefcases and predatory looks. She observed them from the second-floor window, cataloguing each face, each expression of sick anticipation. There were politicians she vaguely recognized from old newspapers, agribusiness executives with their prominent bellies and gold watches, some foreigners with difficult-to-identify accents, and others whose presence simply radiated danger. They all had one thing in common: eyes that mentally undressed her before even seeing her in person. "It's time," said Victoria, entering the room without knocking. She carried a small syringe in her right hand. "This will help you relax, make everything more bearable." "No." The word came out firmly, surprising even Emily. "I won't take that." "It's not a choice, dear." But when Victoria approached, Emily reacted with a speed that surprised them both. She grabbed her stepmother's wrist firmly, twisting until she dropped the syringe, which shattered on the wooden floor. "You're going to go down with me," said Emily, her voice loaded with new determination. "And I'll cooperate, but consciously. I want to see the faces of everyone who thinks they can buy me." Victoria observed her with a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect. "Very well. Perhaps this will even increase the price. Some like it when there's a bit of personality." The main room of the estate had been converted into an improvised auction hall. Leather chairs were arranged in a semicircle around a small elevated platform, where an antique pulpit served as the auctioneer's stand. The black candles created an almost ritualistic atmosphere, and the low murmur of conversations ceased when Emily entered the room. All eyes turned to her. 15 men, maybe more, observing her like hyenas observe a carcass. She kept her head high, shoulders straight, walking as if she was the one in command of the situation. She would be sold, but she would not lower herself. The auctioneer, a thin man with a graying mustache, began his presentation with the pomp of someone selling rare works of art. He described Emily as if she were a thoroughbred horse, detailing her captive upbringing, her restricted education, her perfect physical condition, in a way that made bile rise in her throat. The bid started at $100,000 and rose quickly. 200,000, 300,000, 500,000. Each value pronounced was like a slap to her face, a confirmation that her life had been reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. It was then that he entered the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that seemed to have been tailored specifically for his body, the man drew attention not for what he did, but for what he didn't do. He didn't look at Emily with lust. He didn't smile. He didn't make low comments with the other participants. He was simply there, motionless like a statue, observing the scene with dark eyes that seemed to absorb all the light around them. The murmur of conversations ceased when he entered. Some guests greeted him with nervous nods, others simply moved away as if his presence were toxic. Victoria visibly paled when she saw him, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to maintain her composure. "Gentlemen," said the auctioneer, clearing his throat, "it seems we have an additional participant tonight." The man didn't respond. He just found an empty chair at the back of the room and sat down, his eyes finally meeting Emily's. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity, they looked at each other across the smoky room, and she felt something she had never felt before, the weight of being truly seen by someone. "Very well," continued the auctioneer, visibly nervous. "The current bid is at $800,000. Any interest in continuing?" "1 million," said a deep voice from the back of the room. The silence that followed was deafening. The value echoed through the room like distant thunder. $1 million. The conversations completely ceased, and even the auctioneer seemed to swallow hard before repeating the bid. $1 million from the gentleman. "Excuse me, what is your name?" stammered the thin man, wiping sweat from his forehead with a yellowed handkerchief. "Ethan Hunt," replied the deep voice, loaded with an authority that made everyone present shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine at hearing the name, Hunt. For some reason, that surname resonated in her memory like a distant echo, as if she had heard it before in whispered conversations or forgotten nightmares. "Mr. Hunt," continued the auctioneer, recovering part of his professional composure, "it's a considerable bid. Would any of the other gentlemen like to counteroffer?" The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. The other participants exchanged nervous glances, some whispering among themselves, but none dared to speak. It was as if the mere presence of Ethan Hunt had sucked all the courage and greed from the room. $1,100,000, finally said a fat man with golden rings, but his voice trembled as he pronounced the words. $1,500,000. $100,000, Ethan responded immediately without hesitation, as if he were buying bread at the market. The fat man paled and leaned back in his chair, defeated. The other participants seemed equally discouraged. Some began to stand up, as if the party had ended before it really began. $2 million, said Ethan, even without anyone having made another bid. The declaration fell on the room like a bomb. Victoria, who until then had been observing everything, with a greedy smile, now seemed genuinely shocked. $2 million was more than she could have dreamed in her most optimistic calculations. $2 million, repeated the auctioneer, his voice almost inaudible. Any other bids? No one spoke up. The room was so silent that one could hear the crackling of the black candles and the distant sound of crickets outside. Very well then. 2 million once. Twice. The auctioneer raised a small wooden hammer. Sold to Mr. Ethan Hunt. The sound of the hammer hitting the table echoed like a gunshot in the night. Emily felt her legs weaken, but forced herself to remain standing. She had been sold. Officially, legally, completely sold, as if she were cattle or a piece of antique furniture. The other guests began to disperse quickly, some seeming relieved not to have won the auction, others clearly disappointed. Low-voiced conversations echoed through the room as they headed for the exits, but all gave a wide berth around Ethan Hunt, as if he were a dangerous beast that might attack at any moment. Ethan remained seated until the room was almost empty, then stood up and walked slowly to where Emily was standing. Up close, she could see that he was even more imposing than he had seemed from a distance. He must have been about 35, with dark hair slightly graying at the temples, skin tanned by the country sun, and a small but visible scar on the left side of his chin. His eyes were what impressed her most, dark brown, almost black, carrying a deep sadness that contrasted with the iron authority of his posture. They were eyes of someone who had seen too much, suffered too much, lost too much. "Do you have luggage?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. The question caught her off guard. After everything that had happened, after being sold like an object, he was asking about luggage as if they were acquaintances leaving for a weekend trip. Yes. Some clothes," she replied, her own voice sounding strange to her ears. "Go get them, quickly." Emily ran up the stairs, her heart beating erratically. She threw some clothes into a small suitcase she had never used, took some personal items of sentimental value, a photo of her parents, a necklace that had belonged to her mother, a book of poetry she hid under the mattress. When she came down, Ethan was talking to Victoria in a low voice. Her stepmother was holding a thick envelope, probably containing the payment, and her face shone with satisfaction. "Ready?" Ethan asked when he saw her approach. She nodded, not trusting her own voice. "Then let's go." He headed for the exit without looking back, and Emily followed him, feeling Victoria's eyes burning into her back. At the door, Ethan stopped and turned to her stepmother. "If you try to contact her or send someone after us, I will personally ensure that you pay for every day of suffering you caused this girl. Understood?" Victoria nodded quickly, all her previous arrogance evaporating, in the face of the veiled threat. Outside, a black car was waiting, a luxury SUV that appeared to be armored. Ethan opened the passenger door for her, a gesture of courtesy that surprised her. When he got in the driver's side, the silence between them was dense and loaded with unspoken meanings. "Where are we going?" she finally asked as they moved. "Away from the Morgan estate." "Home," he replied, without taking his eyes off the dark road ahead, and for the first time in her life, Emily didn't know if that word meant salvation or an even deeper prison. The journey lasted 3 hours through winding rural roads that pushed deeper and deeper into the Virginia countryside. Ethan drove in silence, focused on the dark road, while Emily observed the nocturnal landscape through the window. Mountains covered in forests stood out against the starry sky, and the only sound that broke the silence was the soft purr of the engine and the occasional distant song of some wild animal. Ethan's farm appeared gradually through the darkness like a mirage. First, iron gates even more imposing than Victoria's, then a dirt road lined with ancient oak trees, and finally the main house, a 2-story colonial construction that seemed to have been taken from a period film, with wide porches, white-painted, wooden windows, and a garden that even in darkness exuded the perfume of roses and jasmine. "We've arrived," said Ethan, turning off the engine. He got out first and walked to her side to open the door, once again demonstrating a courtesy that contrasted drastically with the brutality of how she had been acquired. Emily exited the car with trembling legs, still trying to process everything that had happened. The house was even more impressive up close. Soft lights illuminated the main porch, revealing wicker furniture and climbing plants that created a welcoming and almost romantic environment. It was hard to believe that this place belonged to the somber man who had paid $2 million for her a few hours earlier. "Martha," Ethan called upon entering the house, his voice echoing through the wide corridors. A woman of about 60 appeared quickly, wearing an apron over a simple dress and carrying an expression of barely disguised curiosity. Her eyes ran over Emily from top to bottom, but not in a judgmental way, just maternal and slightly concerned. "This is Emily," Ethan said simply. "She's going to stay with us for an indefinite time. Prepare the blue room for her." "Of course. Mr. Ethan, has the young lady had dinner?" Martha asked, addressing Emily directly with a warm smile. The question caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had worried whether she had eaten? "No, I haven't eaten anything today," she admitted. "I'll prepare something quick." "You must be exhausted." As Martha moved away towards what was presumably the kitchen, Ethan turned to Emily. They were now in the main room of the house, a spacious environment with antique but well-preserved furniture, a stone fireplace that dominated one of the walls, and paintings that appeared to be family portraits from various generations. "Some rules," he said, his voice returning to that serious and authoritarian tone. "You can move freely through the house and garden during the day. At night, after 10 o'clock, you must remain in your room. There are places in the house that are forbidden. I'll show you which ones tomorrow. Don't ask questions about my past, or about what I do for a living. And never, under any circumstances, touch me without permission." The last rule made her shudder, not from fear, but from something she couldn't completely identify. There was an intensity in the way he pronounced those words, as if they hid a deep and dangerous pain. "And if I want to leave?" she asked, surprising herself with her own courage. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her as if trying to read her soul. "You won't want to," he finally said. "At least not for a while. You have nowhere to go, no money, no personal documents. Victoria made sure of that. But when you decide you want to leave, I won't stop you." The answer completely confused her. It wasn't what she expected from someone who had paid a fortune for her. "Why not?" she asked. "Because I'm not the monster you think I am," he replied, a shadow of something resembling pain passing through his eyes. "And because you're not what I thought you were when I entered that auction." Before she could ask what he meant by that, Martha returned carrying a tray with a hot cheese sandwich and a glass of warm milk. "The young lady's room is ready," said the older woman, placing the tray on a side table. "It's right there in the hallway, the second door on the right. It has its own bathroom and clean clothes in the dresser." "Thank you," murmured Emily, genuinely touched by the kindness. "Rest," said Ethan, heading for the stairs. "We'll talk more tomorrow." He climbed the wooden steps with long strides, and Emily could hear him walking on the floor above before a door closed at the end of the corridor. The blue room was a pleasant surprise. Walls painted in a soft shade of blue-grey, a double bed with impeccable white sheets, an antique solid wood wardrobe, and a large window that overlooked the garden. There were even fresh flowers in a vase on the dresser, white daisies that filled the environment with their delicate perfume. Emily ate the sandwich sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to process the surreal events of the day. She had been sold at an auction like an object, bought by a stranger for an absurd amount, and now was in a comfortable room being treated with more kindness than she had experienced in years. Ethan Hunt was a complete enigma. His rules were clear but not oppressive. His presence was intimidating but not threatening, and there was something in his eyes that suggested depths of pain and secrets that she could barely imagine. When she finally lay down, still wearing the white dress from the auction because she didn't have the courage to look for other clothes, Emily stared at the ceiling for hours. Outside, she could hear the nocturnal sounds of the countryside, crickets, owls, the wind whispering through the trees. They were sounds of freedom, something she had never really known. Around 3 in the morning, she was awakened by a sound that made her freeze with fear. Heavy footsteps in the hallway, followed by what seemed like muffled groans of pain. She got up from the bed and put her ear to the door, trying to identify what was happening. The groans continued for a few minutes, loaded with such deep anguish that they brought tears to her eyes. Then gradually they ceased, replaced by a heavy silence that lasted until dawn. Emily awoke with the first rays of sun entering through the window of the blue room. She had slept only a few hours, but felt strangely refreshed, as if something fundamental had changed during the night. Perhaps it was the first time in years she had slept without Victoria's oppressive presence on the floor below, or perhaps it was simply the fact that she was alive when, a few hours earlier, she had thought her life was over. She found clean clothes folded on the dresser, jeans, a light blue cotton blouse, and even new underwear still with tags. Someone had been very careful in calculating her exact size, which made her wonder how long Ethan had been planning. What exactly? To buy her, to save her? She still wasn't sure of the difference. Upon going downstairs, she found Martha preparing coffee in the kitchen, a spacious and welcoming environment with Portuguese tiles on the walls and a solid wooden table in the center. The aroma of fresh bread and freshly brewed coffee made her stomach growl with hunger. "Good morning, dear," said Martha with a maternal smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you, and you. I heard some noises during the night." Martha's expression closed slightly, and she looked away to the frying pan where eggs were gently frying. "Ah, that. Mr. Ethan sometimes has nightmares. Since his first wife died, he doesn't sleep very well." First wife. The words echoed in Emily's mind like alarm bells. Ethan had been married and his wife had died. That would explain the deep sadness in his eyes, the house too big for one person, and perhaps even his presence at that sordid auction. How? "Long ago did she die?" Emily asked, trying to sound casual. 5 years, Martha replied, serving the eggs on a plate along with slices of homemade bread. "A terrible accident. She was so young, so beautiful." The older woman made the sign of the cross. Mr. Ethan never fully recovered. Before Emily could ask more questions, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing faded jeans and a work shirt that accentuated the width of his shoulders. He looked tired with deep, dark circles, but his eyes were alert and focused. "Good morning," he said, heading directly to a coffee pot and serving a large cup of black coffee. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." She hesitated for a moment. "And you?" He looked at her over the rim of the cup, and for an instant, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "I sleep enough," he replied evasively. "After breakfast, I'll show you the property. There are places where you can go and places you should avoid." Ethan's farm was impressive. Stretching for hundreds of acres, it included pastures where Arabian horses grazed peacefully, a small preserved forest with serpentine trails, an artificial lake with ornamental fish, and even a carefully maintained organic garden. It was like a world apart, isolated and self-sufficient. "This is the only access road," explained Ethan, pointing to the dirt road they had arrived on the previous night. "The nearest property is 15 miles from here. If you want to leave, you need to tell me first." They walked for almost an hour, and Emily noticed how Ethan knew every detail of his land, the name of each tree, the habits of the animals, the best times to plant and harvest. There was genuine love in his voice when he talked about the farm, a passion that contrasted with the melancholy he carried like a second skin. "And that house over there?" asked Emily, pointing to a smaller construction on top of a hill, half hidden among pine trees. Ethan abruptly stopped walking, his muscles visibly tensing. "That is one of the forbidden areas," he said, his voice returning to that cold and authoritarian tone. "Never go there, for any reason." The intensity of his reaction further aroused Emily's curiosity, but she nodded silently. There were secrets on this property, layers of mystery that she was only beginning to scratch. Back at the main house, Ethan took her to an office on the ground floor, an environment very different from Victoria's clinical and cold one. Here, the walls were covered with shelves full of books, there were framed antique maps, and a dark wooden desk covered with papers and documents. "You need your own documents," he said, opening a drawer and taking out some forms. "I'll arrange for a new ID card, social security number, everything that Victoria never allowed you to have. For this, I need some information." They spent the next hour filling out papers, and Emily realized how many basic things about herself she didn't know. She had never had a bank account, had never voted, had never even left the state of Virginia. At 21, she was practically invisible to the official world. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked when they finished with the paperwork. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, as if internally debating how much he should reveal. "Because you didn't deserve what Victoria did to you," he finally said. "And because I know what it's like to live imprisoned by the past. Are you feeling guilty for having bought me?" "I didn't buy you," he replied, his voice loaded with surprising intensity. "I bought your freedom. There's a difference." That night during dinner, Emily observed Ethan discreetly. He ate in silence, lost in thoughts that seemed too heavy to share. Occasionally, their eyes met across the table, and she felt an electric current pass between them, something powerful and dangerous that neither was ready to acknowledge. When she retired to the blue room, Emily stayed awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the house settling for the night. Around 2 in the morning, the muffled groans began again, coming from upstairs. This time she couldn't resist her curiosity. Emily left the room barefoot, her feet making only whispers against the cold wooden floor. The groans definitely came from upstairs, loaded with such deep anguish that they seemed to tear through the silence of the night like blades. She climbed the stairs slowly, avoiding the creaking steps, guided only by the weak light of the moon that entered through the high windows. The upstairs corridor was longer than she expected, with several closed doors on each side. The sounds clearly came from the end of the corridor, where a strip of golden light escaped from under a partially open door. As she approached, the groans became more distinct, interspersed with whispered words that she couldn't completely understand. "Sophie. No. Please." Ethan's voice was almost unrecognizable, loaded with despair and pain. "I couldn't forgive." Emily stopped a few meters from the door, her heart beating so hard that she feared he might hear it. Sophie. That must be the name of the dead wife. Through the crack in the door, she could see part of a spacious room with a double bed. And Something else that made her blood freeze. On the wall opposite the bed was a huge portrait painted in oils of a young woman with brown hair and green eyes. But it wasn't just any woman. It was a woman who could easily pass for Emily's twin, sister. The same delicate features, the same fair skin, the same face shape. The resemblance was so disturbing that she had to lean against the wall to keep from staggering. The groans abruptly ceased, replaced by a tense silence. Emily heard movement inside the room and quickly ran down the stairs, her heart racing and her mind boiling with frightening questions. She returned to the blue room and threw herself on the bed, pulling the covers up to her chin, as if they could protect her from the disturbing revelations she had just discovered. Ethan hadn't paid $2 million for her randomly. There was something deliberate, calculated, and deeply disturbing about his choice. The resemblance to Sophie couldn't be a coincidence. The next day, Emily woke up determined to get answers. She waited until Ethan went out to take care of the horses, a morning routine that Martha had mentioned, and then headed to the office. If there were secrets in this house, they would be kept there. The drawers were locked, but a careful search revealed a key hidden behind a row of books on agriculture. What she found in the neatly archived folders made her darkest suspicions seem insignificant compared to the reality. There were dozens of photographs of young women, all sharing physical characteristics similar to hers and Sophie's: brown hair, light eyes, fair skin, delicate features. Some photos were clearly from auctions similar to what she had experienced. Women dressed in white, frightened looks, luxurious and sinister environments. But most shocking were the documents attached to each photo, detailed reports on what had happened to each woman after being acquired. Mysterious deaths, disappearances, suicides, a macabre sequence of tragedies that repeated with a terrifying regularity. Looking for something specific? Ethan's voice behind her made Emily jump, dropping some photographs on the floor. She turned slowly, finding him standing in the office doorway, his expression unreadable. "I was looking for a book," she lied, knowing it was useless. Ethan entered the office and closed the door behind him, approaching her with measured steps. Emily backed up until she was leaning against the desk, with nowhere to escape. "You saw?" "To the photographs," he said, more a statement than a question. "Who are these women? What happened to them?" Ethan sighed deeply, running his hands through his dark hair. For a moment he looked older, tired, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Sophie didn't die in an accident," he finally said. "She was murdered by men who participate in these auctions, men who see women like you as disposable objects. And you're trying to save them, is that it?" "I'm trying to avenge her," he corrected, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Each of these women was bought by men who were present the night Sophie died, men who participated in or were complicit in what happened to her." The revelation hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. "You're killing these women to get revenge?" "No." The denial came out with explosive force. "I buy them to free them, to give them a chance to start over, but—" His voice broke slightly. "Not all of them manage to overcome the trauma. Some choose not to live. Others are found by the men who wanted to buy them and—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implications were clear and terrifying. "And me?" asked Emily, her voice barely above a whisper. "Am I just another substitute for Sophie?" Ethan moved closer, and she could see the raw pain in his eyes. "At first, yes," he admitted. "When I saw you at that auction, it was like seeing Sophie being sold again. I thought that by saving you somehow, I would also be saving her." "And now?" He extended his hand and gently touched her face, a touch that she should have rejected, but that instead made her tremble in a completely different way. "Now I know that you're not Sophie. You're stronger, more defiant, more alive. And that terrifies me because it means I'm feeling things I swore I would never feel again." The air between them became electrified, loaded with sexual and emotional tension that had been growing for days. Emily knew she should move away, that she should be afraid, that she should question everything about that impossible situation. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch. "Ethan," she began, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching Engines. They separated quickly, and Ethan went to the window, his expression instantly hardening. "Damn," he muttered. "We need to get out of here now." Through the office window, Emily could see 3 black cars coming up the dirt road, raising clouds of reddish dust. Even at a distance, there was something threatening about the way the vehicles approached. Too fast, too determined. "Who are they?" she asked, but Ethan was already moving, opening a secret drawer in the desk and taking out a pistol she didn't know existed. "Victoria," he answered grimly, checking the gun's magazine. "She must have discovered where you are. Or maybe she decided that 2 million wasn't enough." The sound of the engines was getting closer, now accompanied by male voices shouting instructions that she couldn't completely distinguish. Ethan grabbed her arm firmly, but not violently. "There's a secret passage in the basement that leads to a tunnel. It was built during the time of the settlers, in the last century. It will take you to the forest, near the lake." "And you?" "By time. Meet me at the abandoned house on the hill in 2 hours. If I don't show up—" He hesitated, as if the next words were physically painful. "There's money and documents hidden there, enough for you to start over anywhere." "I won't leave you here alone. Emily." He held her face between his hands, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that made her tremble. "I lost Sophie because I couldn't protect her. I won't make the same mistake twice." Before she could protest again, he kissed her. It was a desperate kiss, loaded with repressed desire and fear that it might be the last. Emily melted against him for a moment that seemed suspended in time, feeling as if she was finally awake after years of sleeping. The sound of tires screeching in the courtyard separated them abruptly. Ethan gently pushed her towards the back door. "Basement. Now." "And Emily?" He looked at her once more, as if wanting to memorize her face. "Be strong. Stronger than Sophie was." She ran through the corridors of the house, hearing behind her the sound of doors being kicked in and harsh voices invading the peaceful environment that had become her refuge. The basement was dark and smelled of damp earth, but Ethan's instructions were clear. Behind a pile of old boxes, she found a worm-eaten wooden door that led to a narrow tunnel. The tunnel was claustrophobic and dark, but she moved forward, guided only by the touch of the damp walls and the determination to survive. Behind her, even through the earth and stone, she could hear muffled sounds that could be shouts or gunshots, or both. When she finally emerged in the forest near the lake, the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and red that seemed to prophesy blood. Emily hid among the trees for a few minutes, trying to spot the main house through the dense vegetation. Dark smoke was rising from one of the second-floor windows. The path to the abandoned house on the hill was a steep climb through poorly defined trails and thorny vegetation that tore her clothes and scratched her skin. But she continued, driven by a mixture of fear and determination she had never felt before. The abandoned house was smaller than it had appeared from a distance, a simple 2-room construction that must have served as housing for staff decades ago. The windows were broken, the roof had leaks, and climbing plants covered half of the exterior walls. But inside, hidden behind a false wall that Ethan had obviously prepared in advance, were the promised documents and money. Emily examined the papers with trembling hands. There was a complete fake identity for her, bus tickets to various American cities, and an amount of money that represented more than she had seen in her entire life. All carefully planned to give her the freedom she had never known. But as the hours passed and Ethan didn't appear, a terrible certainty began to form in her chest. Something had gone wrong, perhaps fatally wrong. When dawn broke, she cautiously descended the hill, approaching the main house through the forest. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Victoria's cars had gone, but left behind a scene of devastation. Broken windows, overturned furniture, and obvious signs of violent struggle. Martha was sitting on the porch steps, crying silently. When she saw Emily approaching, the older woman ran to her with relief and despair mixed. "Thank God you're alive," sobbed Martha, hugging her tightly. "I thought they had taken you too." "What happened? Where is Ethan?" "They took him," Martha replied, wiping her tears with the edge of her apron. "They arrived with armed men looking for you. When they couldn't find you, they took Mr. Ethan. They said he had to pay for interfering in their business." "Where to?" "I don't know, dear, but I heard them mentioning something about a settling of scores, about him having ruined many lucrative deals over the years." Emily felt a cold, crystalline anger forming in her chest. Ethan had risked everything to save her, and now he was paying the price for his kindness. But she was no longer the frightened girl who had been sold at an auction. In the last few weeks, something had fundamentally changed within her. "Martha," she said, her voice loaded with a determination that surprised them both, "I need you to help me. I know where they took Ethan, and I know how to find them." "How? Can you know that?" Emily smiled, but there was no joy in the expression, only a dark promise of revenge. "Because they're going to do to him exactly what they did to me. They'll organize another auction, another grotesque spectacle, and this time I'll be there to watch, but not as a victim." The next 2 days were a transformation that Emily had never imagined possible. With the help of Martha, who revealed she knew much more about the region's shady business than she appeared to, she devised a plan that was both audacious and dangerous. Revenge would be served on the same cold plate on which her freedom had been negotiated. "The second auction will be tonight," said Martha, returning from a trip to town with information obtained through contacts that Emily didn't know existed. "Not at Victoria's estate this time. They've rented a warehouse on the outskirts of Richmond, an isolated place where they can do whatever they want without being bothered." Emily examined her appearance in the mirror of the blue room. She had cut her hair in a more modern and bold style, exchanged the white dresses for dark jeans and a black blouse that enhanced her figure without transforming her into an object of desire. More importantly, there was a new hardness in her eyes, a determination that would have frightened the girl she was a week ago. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Martha asked, for the 10th time. "It's extremely dangerous if they discover who you are." "They already have," Emily replied, checking the digital camera she had bought in town, a small but high-quality model. "That's why they kidnapped Ethan. They know. He interfered in their market, saved women who should have been delivered to their buyers. Now they want to make an example." The plan was simple in its audacity. Emily would infiltrate the auction disguised as an investigative journalist, document everything she could, and then expose the entire network to the authorities and the media. She had contacts that Martha had obtained through a network of women who secretly worked to combat human trafficking in the region. The warehouse was located in an abandoned industrial zone, surrounded by empty factories and vacant lots that created the perfect environment for illicit activities. Luxury cars were already arriving when Emily approached on foot, keeping to the shadows and discreetly photographing license plates and faces. The transformation of the warehouse was even more elaborate than the previous auction. Red curtains divided the space into intimate environments. There was a complete bar serving expensive drinks, and an elevated stage in the center where Ethan was chained. He was alive, but had clearly been beaten. His face showed purple. Bruises? There was dried blood on his torn shirt, and his hands were bound by heavy handcuffs to a metal structure that forced him to remain standing. Even so, his posture was defiant, his dark eyes burning with contained anger. Emily felt her determination falter for a moment when she saw him in that state. She wanted to run to him, free him, take him far away from that nightmare. But she forced herself to remain focused on the mission. Ethan had risked everything to save her. Now it was her turn to save him. "Gentlemen," Victoria's familiar voice echoed through the warehouse via a microphone. She was elegantly dressed, as if she were a gala hostess instead of a human trafficker. "Welcome to a very special event. Not only do we offer a unique merchandise today, but also the opportunity to punish someone who dared to interfere in our legitimate business." Murmurs of approval ran through the audience. Emily counted at least 20 men, most of whom she recognized, from the previous auction, plus some new faces. All shared the same expression of sadistic excitement. "Ethan Hunt," continued Victoria, approaching the stage, "thought he could play hero. He bought several of our girls over the years. depriving you of legitimate entertainment. Tonight he, himself, will become entertainment. What followed was a grotesque farce of an auction where men bid not to possess Ethan, but to decide what his punishment would be. Creative tortures were proposed as if they were works of art, each suggestion more sadistic than the previous. Emily photographed everything, documented every face, every word, every moment of human depravity being displayed before her. But when the bids began to become too specific, when it became clear that Ethan would really die there, she knew she had to act. The distraction came in the form of a distant siren. Emily had sent anonymous messages to the police an hour earlier, but with a slightly wrong location to give time to document the event. Now, as the sound approached, panic began to spread among the participants. "Police!" someone shouted. "It's a trap!" The warehouse was instantly transformed into chaos. Men ran in all directions, cars were hastily started, and in the confusion, Emily managed to approach the stage. With a screwdriver she had brought, she forced the locks of the handcuffs while Ethan looked at her with a mixture of shock and admiration. "You," he said, his voice hoarse. "How?" "We'll explain later," she replied, helping him to stand. "Now we need to get out of here." But Victoria hadn't fled with the others. She was standing between them and the exit, holding a pistol with surprisingly steady hands. "Little Emily," she said with a venomous smile. "I always knew you would cause problems. I should have sold you much younger." "You killed my father," said Emily, finally confronting the truth she had suspected for years, "and ruined my entire life. And I would do it all again," Victoria replied. "You have no idea how much money I lost because of you." The shot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, but it wasn't Victoria who fired. Ethan had thrown himself in front of Emily at the last second, and Victoria's shot hit him in the left shoulder instead of Emily's heart. Dark red blood ran down his shirt as he staggered, but he remained standing, protecting Emily with his own body. "You idiot," muttered Victoria, preparing to shoot again. "Now I'll have to kill you both." But the sound of sirens was getting closer, and this time they were real. The information Emily had passed to the authorities, along with the photographs and documented evidence, had finally reached the right people. Police cars invaded the warehouse yard, surrounding the building with flashing lights and loudspeakers, ordering everyone to surrender. In the confusion that followed, Victoria tried to escape through the back of the warehouse, but was intercepted by police officers who had already completely surrounded the building. Emily watched her stepmother being handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car, shouting threats and accusations that no one took seriously anymore. "It's over," whispered Ethan, leaning on her as they waited for the paramedics. "Really over." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of testimonies, investigations, and revelations that shocked not just the region, but the entire country. The human trafficking network dismantled by the police operation revealed connections with politicians, businessmen, and public figures that no one suspected. Emily inadvertently became the face of the investigation, the brave survivor who had risked everything to expose the truth. But what mattered most to her happened on a spring afternoon. 3 months later, when Ethan was discharged from the hospital, he had fully recovered from the shoulder wound, but the emotional scars took longer to heal. Emily remained by his side throughout the process, and together they began to rebuild not just their individual lives, but something new and powerful between them. "You saved my life," said Ethan as they walked through the garden of the farm, which Martha had impeccably maintained during his absence, in every possible way. "You saved mine first," replied Emily, intertwining her fingers with his, "and taught me that I was stronger than I ever imagined." The abandoned house on the hill had been transformed into an art studio where Emily painted portraits of women, not submissive victims, but surviving warriors with fire in their eyes and determination in their chins. Her works began to attract attention from gallery owners in New York and Boston, offering her a career she had never dreamed possible. Ethan, in turn, converted part of his property into a temporary shelter for women escaping situations of abuse and trafficking. Working with national and international organizations, he used his painful experience to help other people find their way back to freedom and dignity. "There's something I need to show you," he said one night, 6 months after the events at the warehouse. They were sitting on the porch of the main house, observing the stars that shone with crystalline intensity in the clear country sky. He took her to the room she had spied on that night that seemed to have happened in a previous life. Sophie's portrait was still on the wall, but now there were other paintings next to it, paintings that Emily had made of other saved women, including a self-portrait where she appeared not as a victim, but as a conqueror. "Sophie would be part of this gallery," Ethan said softly. "A survivor among survivors. Not an obsession, but an inspiration." Emily turned to him, seeing how the pain in his dark eyes had transformed into something different. There was still sadness there, but also hope, love, and the promise of a future that neither had imagined possible. "I love you," he said, the words coming out as if they were being released from a prison where they had been locked up for years. Not as a substitute for Sophie, not as salvation or redemption, but as Emily, as the brave and impossible woman you've become. "I love you too," she replied, gently touching the scar on his chin. "Despite everything, because of everything, beyond everything." The kiss they shared there in the room where the ghosts of the past had finally found peace was different from anything Emily had experienced. It was a kiss of freedom, of choice, of two adults who had been through hell and decided to build paradise with their own hands. Months later, when they married in a simple ceremony in the garden of the farm, surrounded only by Martha, some loyal staff, and the women who had passed through the shelter, Emily wore a blue dress, the color of freedom, of hope, of the infinite sky that was finally hers to explore. And when, a year later, she held in her arms the son who carried half of Ethan's genes and half of her own realized dreams, she knew she had reached the end of one journey and the beginning of another completely new one. A journey where she would write each page, make each decision, live each moment as the free and powerful woman she had always been destined to be. The Morgan estate, that first golden cage, was sold and the money used to expand the shelter. Victoria was serving a 20-year sentence for human trafficking and homicide and would never again represent a threat to any vulnerable woman. In the end, Emily Taylor had discovered that freedom wasn't something that could be bought or sold. It was something that was conquered